Hi everybody. In this video, we're going to be building a web page completely from scratch. Whether you are new to web development and you just want to get a feel for what it takes to build a web page using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or whether you're a pretty experienced web developer who's often built web pages or built parts of pages as part of a larger, more complex system like a content management system or CMS, this will be an overview of what it's going to take to start from the ground up and build really with the bare parts, the core pieces of what a typical web page would look like without any extra fluff or niceties that a lot of the modern tools and frameworks typically provide. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you had any curiosity in what it takes to build a web page, this video is exactly what you're going to need. So let's get started. So at a high level, a web page is something you might typically navigate to in your browser. Right now, I'm on the google.com website, and right now I have the home page disabled. Home page displayed, not disabled, displayed. And so another popular website could be Wikipedia. You can go to wikipedia.com, and there is an example of like Wikipedia where you can browse through content that others have created. I can, for example, click on what is Merriamburg. I have no idea. But now that I clicked on it, I have the ability to see it and I can navigate through various pieces of it. A popular website that you might be using as well is this one, group.com. For something's broken right now, but that's okay. We'll deal with that later. Let me make everything bigger and zoom out a bit. And so here you can see a very popular web page for web developers where you can look at all kinds of things, zoom in, zoom out, and look at all that stuff. But behind the scenes, a web page is not what you see here. It's not everything you see on the screen. What ultimately powers this is a lot of text, a lot of things that look like English-looking words. If I zoom in a bit, you can see things like some color values, some text. Let me scroll down a bit. You can see all the various pieces that make up the final content that you ultimately end up seeing. Now, I don't want to over-index on this thing right here, but the thing to keep in mind is that what you might be seeing in your browser that looks like a typical web page is powered behind the scenes by things that is created or that you write made up of a variety of HTML elements, variety of JavaScript like things, and some CSS, and any combination of other frameworks and popular libraries that have their own look and feel that might be going into it. So a typical web page is something you see that does interesting things, but behind the scenes though, it's always written in a format that a browser understands, which often looks very different than what ultimately gets rendered. So, there's a lot of debates on whether what you're seeing here is a programming language or not. I don't really get into those details of what it is or isn't, but all I do know is that what you're writing here is a language called HTML. It has to do with programming in some form, so you can kind of figure out where I stand on that whole debate. And so what we're going to do is create a very simple example. I'm going to create an example that looks like this. Let's play with it for a bit. You see a blank page. It has the word click me in it, and it's a button. And let me click it as it says. And you see the words hello world appear on screen. Let's see it one more time. Click me, hello world appears on screen. So what you and I are going to do is start from scratch and build this web page from empty page to seeing it with the current look and feel, which is this yellowish theme. And then there's like a button. When you click it, there's some interactivity. The words hello world are going to appear. So it sounds pretty exciting, doesn't it? So let me make sure that I have my notes up here so that I don't forget any of the code that I need to be explaining. So the way we write a web page, the way we start building this, is by using what's known as a code editor or a text editor. Now, you can write HTML, the weird text that we saw earlier that powered group.com, for example. Well, you can use it using TextEdit or Notepad, depending on what default text editor your browser provides, or you can use something more elaborate like Dreamweaver, which is provided by Adobe, or Visual Studio Code, where you have a lot of interesting additional tools beyond just the ability to write text. You can either have drag and drop and like a what you see is what you get interface with Dreamweaver, or you can have all this nice color coding and very optimized for large amounts of code, like you have it VS Code. And so whatever tool you use, there's no right or wrong answer here. But what I am going to do though is I'm going to go ahead and use Visual Studio Code. So if you don't have a preference, my favorite code editor is Visual Studio Code. And so if you've never used Visual Studio Code before, just Google it, search for it. You'll go to the Visual Studio Code website where you can then download the code editor that you can use, and make sure you choose the one that is optimized for your platform. The default does a good job of making sure the right version is provided, but if you want something that is different, by all means, go for it. So I'm going to go ahead and close the browser for now. Okay, so I have Visual Studio Code open, And when you first open Visual Studio Code, there's not a whole lot you're going to be seeing. It's going to look, pretty simple. There's going to be some icons and some areas here. I'm going to go to File and New File. And what I'm going to type here now is that here's a document that's going to make up our overall HTML that we're going to be using to create the example that we wanted to create earlier. So the first thing I'm going to do is just save this document. Right now it has really no name to it. It is untitled-1. It's not saved on disk anywhere. So let's go and save it. And I'm going to go ahead and save it to my desktop. And what I'm going to call this file is just hello world.htm. And notice the extension .htm. That's an important detail because that allows the browser, or in this case, the operating system, to know that when a file like this is created, to go ahead and open it in the browser because that's a default HTML. There's a lot, we can go into much more detail in the future on how to make something open up in the browser independent of the extension. But for now, just remember to save it as a .htm or even a .html file that you might see in certain cases. So now I'm currently seeing the hello world text right here on my desktop, which is where I saved it. And if I double click this file, you can see the browser now opens up. And if I look at the browser right now, you should be seeing the same thing that I'm seeing right here, which is a blank screen. And it is blank because we haven't specified anything that goes into it yet. And that's the work that we're going to do first. So the first thing I'm going to do is specify that this is an HTML file that we need to put all kinds of interesting things into. And so there's going to be a little bit of copying and pasting or mimicking what I'm going to see here because there's a very prescribed format that our document needs to be created in. But almost always, the first thing we do is doc type HTML. And you can notice that the way I specified it is, with the bracket, exclamation mark, doc type HTML. And in this case, Visual Studio Code kind of auto-completed parts of these things for me. These are like niceties that the code editor of your choice will be using. If you're using something very basic like text edit or notepad, you may not get those, but that's why I kind of recommend using a code editor like Visual Studio Code because you get some conveniences which do simplify your life every now and then. And so now I'm going to type in HTML lang equals en-us. Just specifying that here's the language, and then the closing tag was automatically added for me. And let me add some space here just to give some visual spacing. I'm going to add a head element. Instead, I'm going to add meta charset equals UTF-8. It's the format that all of the content inside of it will be treated as. That's the character set. We'll worry about that and go into detail on that at some point in the future. And I'm creating a title called hello. And the last thing is I'm going to add a body element. This is really where the content of my page will ultimately live. So if I go back to my browser and refresh this page, you'll see that nothing really has changed overall here. But if you can notice the tab, you'll see the word hello appearing, which is the title that I provided here. So there's a little bit of proof that what we're building is now showing up in the code editor as well. Now, a common workflow that you'll be seeing is one where I am going to be making some modifications in the code editor and then going back to my browser and refreshing the page and seeing how this all works. There's workflows where oftentimes this is automated, but for right now, because we're starting from the ground up, we are just doing it just like people did hundreds of years ago, manually. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust my screen a bit so I can see both the code editor and the actual browser at the same screen. And so I'm just going to I'm going to tile this window to the left side of the screen, and then I'm going to have my browser showing up here. So all I've really done is say, I have my code editor on one side, and then I have my actual browser that's showing all this work on this side. So you don't have to do that. You can still Alt tab or Command tab back and forth, but this makes things a little bit easier. And so now that we have like our HTML declaration, our HTML tag, and some basic content about the web page, in this case, the character set to use to render the content and the title, let's go ahead and add some more things to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some visual elements. And so I'm going to add a div element to provide a very basic structure. Then I'm going to p tag with a question mark. That will be essentially a paragraph tag that has a question mark tag in it. And then button, click me. Exclamation mark. Yeah, I'll set an exclamation mark. All right. So eventually, I've just provided some very basic information to tell our browser that we want to have a structured element, instead of div, I want it to be, there's a paragraph element with a question mark, and there's a button element that says click me on it. Now, where these elements and all these things come from, I did not make that up. It's part of the HTML language specification. And if you're not familiar with like some of these elements, don't worry about it. Right now, you're just kind of trying to get a page up and running and built using my guidance. But afterwards, I do encourage you to go and read up on all the HTML elements that are available, just so you can be able to use a variety of them and also the best practices on how to use them, just so you're getting better at understanding web development. So let me refresh the page, see what's going on here. Let me zoom in a bit. So there you go. So you can see that now what I've done is I added some HTML with the p tag question mark and a button, and now shows up in the browser. And if I click it, you can kind of see that it does typical button-like things. There's a little color changes when I hover over it. When I press it, the color changes as well. Now, nothing actually happens, and that is currently by design, because HTML elements are often presentational elements where they present information. The interactivity, the part where they react or do different things, are often done by JavaScript, which we'll be getting to in a little bit. And so now that we talked about like the basic structure that we have here, it's time to add some styling to make this look a little bit more like the page that we saw earlier, where we had this nice yellow background, a yellow border, and then our content itself was styled differently. And so the way we style content, there are multiple ways, but the way we're going to be styling content right now is by having a style tag where we specify our CSS, or it's also known as cascading style sheets. The way CSS works is that it's a very much like a syntax used to like find something and then specify what you want to do on the thing that you found. So the first thing that we would call a selector is the path or the way you're going to be specifying what to actually select on the page. And then the second part is the collection of visual things that you want to specify to make the adjustments that you'll ultimately see on screen. And this will probably make a little bit more sense when I walk through it. So I'm going to type in, first I'm going to do body, curly brackets or braces, and then background color. And the color is going to be, let's make it an interesting yellow color. So FFD131. And so what this basically says is that find the element called body on this page. And when I select it, you can see that the body element in my HTML is selected, and specify the background color CSS property and set a value, in this case, of this like really nice yellow. And so if I refresh this page now, after I save it, you'll see that now that yellow color now appears. And so what we really have here is the, just to reemphasize, here's our selector, and here's our declaration, where we specify both the property, background color, and the value that is going to go beyond it. And so now let's go ahead and add a few more styles to fully flesh this out. So I'm going to go ahead and do div. Let me make sure that I have it displayed properly. Yep, div, background color, hashtag FFE99B. And that just gives the div element that we have wrapping our text and the button a different look. Padding is 20 pixels. This adjusts the spacing between them. Font family, sans serif. And these are all values that you will see as specified by the HTML specification again, or in this case, the CSS specification. These are not things that I'm arbitrarily specifying. These are predefined values. I'm just selecting which of the predefined values that I want to specify to make this all look the way we want it to. So text align specifies how that word's going to be centered or not. 500 pixels, border radius 5 pixels, margin 0 auto. This kind of just centers that content there. There are more modern ways of being able to do centering of content, but I don't want to get into all of that right now. So let me just save what we have right now for a div element and refresh the page. You can now see that by making these changes, our div element that is wrapping our content looks a little bit nicer. You can now see that our pages are look a little bit more like what we kind of started off doing, but we're not done yet. Let's go ahead and change the way our paragraph appears. So P and an extra curly bracket got added. So font size, we're going to use 3EM, and margin is going to be 20 pixels. So it's going to see that this text is going to be much, much larger after making this change. And next I'm going to go ahead and specify the button itself, the click me. It looks pretty plain. So button, font size 16 pixels, font weight is going to be bold. And let's see, padding 10 pixels, make it a little bit larger, but more breathing room. And I'm going to give it a border, 4 pixels solid, and let's make it just a dark, just make it black. Typically you don't use directly black or white for a variety of different reasons, but I'm just going to keep it very simple right now and kind of go against the typical grain here in terms of best practices. All right, button : hover, which means what's the behavior when I hover over the button. I'm going to not do much. I'm just going to change the background color to #9 FFFE3. And these are known as like pseudo selectors because they are not officially what you see when you see the page originally, but then they become alive, I guess, to use the word, when you hover over it, or when you are, in this case, giving focus to the button itself. So when it's active, it's going to be 000, and the color is going to be FFF. Okay, so we added a lot of things here, and I know that if you've never used CSS before, this might all look a little bit cryptic, but the main thing to keep in mind is that all we're doing is just specifying the various visual properties that will make our button, in this case, look the way it does, and same as our text. So let me refresh the page, and now you can see that our button looks, reflects the kind of look we were kind of go for. When I hover over it, you can see there's like a nice blue color, and when I give it focus, you can see that the active state, where the background color is black and the foreground color is white, kicks in very nicely. So pretty straightforward there. And so the next thing really is that if we take a look at some of this, what we are currently seeing is a pretty plain page. There's no real interactivity, no actions going on here. And that interactivity, though, is provided by JavaScript. The language, that is a programming language. I don't think anyone's going to disagree about that, where you get to specify all the things we've provided in our page, how we can actually make it do interesting things based on whatever we want to do, whether it is programmatically change the color of everything every few seconds, all the way to getting some data from some server somewhere and displaying it, or in the case of what we're going to do, which is really listen for a click on the button that we have, and when that click is overheard, change the text from question mark to hello world. And so to specify JavaScript, one way is by specifying the script element and writing a JavaScript in the HTML page directly. Oftentimes you might even see a JavaScript file being created separately and then it being referenced in this page in the same way you might have an image being inserted into a document where the image is a separate file but it's inserted or linked to this document. But we're going to keep it simple, just like our styles are currently in the page that we're currently in. Our script element that's going to be powering our JavaScript is going to be right there as well. And so the way I'm going to be doing this is a common approach for how you use JavaScript to make or react to changes on a page. Is the first thing is you figure out a way to get access to the element in JavaScript, and then you listen for, in this case, a click event, and then once that event is overheard, often known as an event listener function that overhears that event, runs some code that does exactly what we want it to do. So I'm going to do let button element equals document that query selector button. Just like in CSS where we kind of targeted the button by just specifying the button tag, I'm doing a similar thing in JavaScript by using a method called query selector. I'm just doing button. Let text element equals document that query selector and p. There are many ways of actually targeting an element that is more specific than by just specifying the HTML tag itself. Like, what if you had like multiple p elements or multiple button elements? This would, how do you know which one's the right one to target? But we will get into all of that at some later time. Like, not something I want to focus on too much right now. And so now that we have access to this element, I want to make sure that we can listen to the click event and then do the right thing here. So click, change text, and false. I have videos and articles that go into more detail on all of these things you're seeing here. So, just note that all we're doing right now is saying that, hey, JavaScript, if you overhear a click event, call this change text function that we're doing here. So speaking of which, let's go and define a change text function. And what I'm going to do in this change text function is we want to change it from a question mark to the text we want to see. So text element dot inner text, which is the magic path of the property in this case, to change the value of whatever element we're currently dealing with. So I'm going to type in hello world. Okay, so if everything worked out correctly, we'll be getting a reference to the elements in our HTML in JavaScript, button element and text element. We're telling JavaScript that when the click event is overheard, called change text, and when the change text function is called, there's the inner text property on our text element that allows you to change what we're seeing here. So let's see, mentally this seems like it works, but you never know what minor mistakes might have kind of cropped up as me recording this, so we'll see. So refreshing the page, as expected, nothing has changed initially, but the real thing is if I click it, will I see something new come up? And yes, when I hit click me, hello world showed up on screen. So now let me just go and close the browser for a brief, actually not keep the browser open. I just want to quickly review like everything we've done so far. We started off with a blank document, nothing was there. We saved it with a .html extension, so that way when you opened it in our browser or opened it by double clicking on it via our operating system, it knew to open up our default browser and display that page. It was blank, nothing was there. And we started off by first adding some HTML, which is really the structure or the skeleton of what our page is going to look like. We added some text and a button, and then that, of course, the skeleton by itself is not very interesting looking. It's very plain. So we added some styling to it, in many ways that you might think of it as the skin, by using CSS, cascading style sheets. And we used very simple selector syntax and properties to make modifications to change the appearance, change the text to look nice, change the background color to be more representative of what we want to do. And of course, the last thing really is the brains and the functionality that needs to make our skeleton with skin look nicer. That's where JavaScript comes in. That's where the interactivity part comes in. And that's where we specified when we click on this button, the text actually changes. So that was really a whirlwind overview of how we go from where we are now to being able to have a page going. Though this is just really the beginning, and this video is an interesting one in me recording this because there's a lot of prerequisites, there's a lot of like conceptual initial know-how that this video did not cover. So it's not if you've never done any web development before, if you have no idea what web development is, this video might be getting you too much into the weeds. If you're an advanced web developer who's done this stuff inside and out for a long time, a lot of this, maybe even all of this, would be things that you're not only familiar with, but in the back of your mind you probably have a billion different ways of going, this is wrong, there are better ways of doing this. And you're correct. I did not cover all the best practices and the rabbit holes that go into making some of these things look differently, even the end result is the same. And that's kind of it's a balance I'm trying to strike between not being so complicated that someone who is somewhat familiar with web development isn't scared away, but also making sure that it is not so trivially poorly done that you're going in a path that is not going to lead you up for success. It's a very scoped down problem I'm trying to solve here. Now, here's an important part. If you need help on any of this, if there's any part of this where you're not sure what does web development even mean, is it a career path that I want to take, what exactly am I doing with this code editor, please ask. There's a forum, it's called forum.group.com, where there are over 200,000 members, all web developers or people who care about web development, and also more importantly care about helping others like you become better and help get their questions answered, because there was a time when all of us had to learn from the beginning and were stuck and needed to figure out how to go from point A to point B. And that is really something that I want to make sure you have the ability to get those questions answered, get unblocked. So please go to the forums at forum.group.com, where I will personally respond to many questions, and a lot of great people who also care about helping will respond to your questions as well. So don't hesitate. If you like this video, tell your friends and enemies all about it. Hit subscribe to be notified of other videos that will be coming along in a similar vein. Follow me at Krupa on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, wherever that you might see Krupa showing up, and you can be notified of interesting web development updates. Actually, I take it back. On Instagram, it's not Krupa. That's someone else, actually. It's Krupa C with the letter C. So it's Krupa plus C. That's on Instagram. Yeah, I know. I was a little late in the whole Instagram game. And lastly, if you like reading content as opposed to watching in video format, a lot of what I create content for is available for free on Krupa.com, the website that I showed you at the very beginning. But it's also available in book form if you enjoy the tactical feel, or the tactile feel, not tactical, tactile feel of a physical book, or a Kindle device displaying it on Kindle, which is often on iPads these days, or an Android tablet, or maybe on a Kindle device. I don't know. Haven't seen the market stats in a while. Check out my books on a variety of different topics, ranging from advanced topics around like animation and React to more fundamental topics around how to just be getting better at JavaScript, or using arrays or Canvas, or a whole host of books that I might have written between when this video was first recorded and when you're viewing it now. And so with that, I will talk to you all next time.